how does the Christian come to a conclusion about an issue when we maybe don't have something explicit to tell us what we're supposed to think? Let's follow the 7 steps for determining biblical worldview with or without explicit Bible verses, starting with step number 1, become an Etch-a-Sketch. That's right, just clear your brain of whatever your pre-understandings are on the issue. Please note there is a difference between a pre-understanding and a presupposition. My presupposition is Jesus Christ rose from the dead. He ascended into heaven. He is the King of the universe, and He is coming again to judge the living and the dead. How do I know that? Because my presupposition says that book called the Bible is the inspired, infallible, inerrant Word of God, and I am not moving an inch. So don't even bother trying. That is a presupposition, but that's different than a pre-understanding. What is my pre-understanding on the issue of pedophilia? Wicked, terrible, atrocious, sinful, deplorable act of abuse. That's my pre-understanding, but as a Christian, I'm willing to go, all right, that's how I feel about it. For whatever reason, I've come to that conclusion. I'm willing to set that aside and let the Bible alone inform me. That brings us to step number 2. What are the explicit, clear-cut verses? This is what it says. End of debate. In this instance, I don't have any. So I move then to step 3, which are implicit Bible verses. Do we have any verses that direct us to a correct conclusion that would be definitive regarding the subject of pedophilia? I think we have a bunch here, or just 3. Let's go back to the garden. God defined the terms for intimacy. 1 man, 1 woman in a lifelong covenant relationship. Pedophilia doesn't qualify for that. Therefore, it is wrong. Not a preference issue, it's just wrong. That's 1 verse. 2nd verse would be Jesus himself. You mistreat a child, better for you to have a millstone tied around your neck and you get dropped into the ocean. You don't hurt little kids. Can we please agree that there's a reason we used to call pedophilia child abuse and not child flourishing? I think that verse gives us some pretty clear direction. Romans 1 would be a 3rd verse, which talks about natural acts of intimacy. There are certain types of behavior that are natural, that are right, that are good. We kind of look at it and we go, yeah, that makes sense. And other things that are not. Men and men, not natural. Women and women, not natural. But I think it goes beyond that into species and kinds. We look at that and go, okay, a human and an animal, that ain't right, although we do have very clear verses on bestiality. But I think that we can also take a look at age discrepancies that are pretty dramatic and go, you know, an adult and a child, it's just not natural. And those would just be 3 verses. Now, these 3 implicit verses, I think, are a little different than our cremation verses. These are verses that are talking about sinful behavior. For cremation, I was just taking verses that are picture painting, some of the patterns we see at the Bible that don't seem to have sin implications to them. These verses, like, that's a sin. Does pedophilia fold underneath those 3 verses? And I think the answer is yes on all 3. So suddenly pedophilia is a little different than burial rites. However, not done yet. I also want to take a look at church history. What did the people who have come before me, remember they're not inspired, but it doesn't mean that they were knuckleheads. What was the attitude of the church historically on pedophilia? Just no debate. It's a sin. That's just a wicked sin. Another category, this one's going to sound maybe just a little bit challenging. The gospel. What does the gospel do to inform my understanding of the issue of pedophilia? And I think it says a lot, because the gospel says a lot. The gospel is for our good, for God's glory, for our good. It is for human flourishing. Does pedophilia do good to children? Does it cause them to flourish, or does it cause them to have nightmares for the rest of their life? The gospel informs my understanding of the issue. Another category would be my testimony. If I do this act that I'm debating, what will the world think? And I think, at least for a season yet, The world would think, you call yourself a follower of Jesus Christ, and yet you do that to a child. That is a radical disconnect that undermines my testimony. Then I take all of those and I think them through very carefully. I shake it out and I come to the conclusion, and I don't care what objection you offer because they can all be batted away. Pedophilia, a wicked abomination, because the Bible verses that imply that are also verses about sin issues versus cremation. Bible verses that imply it but don't categorize it as a sin. There you go. There's your 7 steps to determining a worldview. If you'd like more Wretched content, and who wouldn't, visit wretched.org and you will have Wretched coming out of your nose. And that's biblical.